Welcome to the Theology of Business podcast, where marketplace Christians explore God's will and ways for business. This show features conversations with today's Christ-centered business leaders who are representing Christ faithfully in the business world. I'm your host, Darren Shear, and if you want to make your work, leadership, and company's culture more Christ-centered, you've come to the right place. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Darren Shear, and this is the show for marketplace Christians seeking to explore and apply God's will for business. On this episode, we are joined by my good friend, Lucas Asper. Luke is a shareholder in the Greenville office of Ogletree Deacons and co-chair of the firm's multi-state advice and counseling practice group, representing management in all aspects of labor and employment law. So suffice it to say, he's one of the best labor law attorneys in South Carolina. And we are two former prodigal sons who grew up together, went to high school together, and got into some trouble together. But the Lord has just brought it all the way back around, and we get to connect, and we just shared a stage at the Faith in the Corporate World Conference at Anderson University recently. So being able to do that with somebody that you used to be running from God with is just a really exciting thing, and just a testament to, like my dad would always say to his friends who had prodigal sons and daughters, don't give up on your kids. So I think that's for somebody here today listening. So Luke, welcome to the Theology of Business podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the overly kind introduction, which is not fully deserved, that's for sure. But couldn't echo your sentiments more about how exciting it is to reconnect and to see what God's doing in your life and in mine, and how he's using completely and utterly failing individuals like us to do things.
That's right. I didn't even mention that we got our ears pierced the same night under the influence back when we were, I guess we were both 16, down in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So you never know what God is going to do in the future. So here we are.
Likely an extremely sanitary situation too.
Oh, yes, no doubt. So Luke, when did you first realize God wanted to be involved in your work in business and law?
You know, I mean, that's a loaded question. I probably knew it all along. It was once I really realized that no matter what your occupation is, that God's plan is to work through you and in you as you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. And that really came along with my faith just getting deeper and building and strengthening that more so than any unique or distinct point in my career.
So I really enjoyed your presentation at Anderson University, enlightening a lot of the primarily HR leaders that were in the audience. Based on the cases that you've worked on or that you're working on now, how have you seen Christians getting into legal trouble for expressing their Christian faith at work?
So there's several different ways. Number one is when the believer themselves is creating a religiously hostile environment as defined by the law. And that is, there's a lot of legal words in there, and it's a loaded phrase that there's lots of terms apart. But the easy way to think about it is when a believer is trying to cram their beliefs down someone else's throat. It's proselytizing in the workplace. It's when we take that step beyond just sharing our beliefs, beyond traditional faith-based conversations, to criticizing other people, ostracizing other people and their personal lives because their lives and beliefs don't conform to yours. Unfortunately, we live in a society where there's a lot of people who would identify as Christians who go around and it's not sharing the gospel. It's not messages out of love, certainly not grace. It's just truth all the time. And that's the exclusive focus. which in this context often involves criticism of other individuals, or worse yet, attacks on other individuals for what they're doing, what they're saying, etc. I'll repeat the same story I told at the conference, which is my favorite case that I ever worked on in that context, and I'll shorten it as much as I can. But devout Christian lady in a workplace that shared her beliefs with everybody, and having a conversation with a young female coworker on a Monday morning, talking about what happened over the weekend. Young female coworker acknowledges that there had been some alcohol involved, and that sweet little old lady looked at her dead in the eye and said, "That's nice, honey. I hope you know you're going to hell." And so took it from just sharing her beliefs to really going on attack. And that did ultimately lead, because of a pattern of behavior like that, to that sweet little old lady getting terminated. And from a legal perspective, it's an interesting case to me, because she was terminated because of her religious beliefs. And so it feels like that should be a violation of the law. But what the court said in that case was, you crossed the line, and you weren't just sharing your beliefs anymore. You were trying to cram those down someone else's throat and creating what was a religiously hostile environment, especially once she was put on notice and kept doing it. So that's kind of path number one, is when you take it from having the Bible on your desk, sharing your beliefs with somebody, to picking up that Bible and beating somebody over the head with it, is the way I always describe it. Path number two to get in trouble is just, and this is more on the management side, because employees on the day to day, that first example is really what you're going to see more than anything else, because the laws implicate employer actions in the workplace. They don't really talk about what a coworker can and can't do. While there are no First Amendment rights to freedom of speech within a private workplace, at least, there certainly is an understanding that as long as you don't cross the line and engage in overtly unlawful behavior, that people are going to say things that other people just don't agree with, and that's okay. They're going to want to do things that other people don't agree with and that don't align with their beliefs, and that's okay. It's not unlawful. But that's really how coworkers or just the run-of-the-mill employee can get in trouble. Where we really see the legal issues more often is with company decisions and management decisions, because that's when management's acting on behalf of the company. And so whether it's in interviews, questions that are asked, whether it's hiring decisions to the exclusion of people based on what their beliefs are, or maybe what their beliefs aren't, and then events that are being held that can favor one group over another. So that's kind of a high level summary. I'm
Yeah.
sure you have follow-up questions
Yeah.
and want to poke and prod on that a little bit.
Yeah, indeed. So your client is the employer, right? Who was being sued by this sweet old lady, right? So
That's
now,
right.
so now in the courtroom, your client is the defendant, and you're having to question and prove why, as a Christian, from Christian to Christian, why what you did, sister, is just not okay. Which is interesting, because Paul talks about don't bring your grievances to the secular courts. Of course, in that day, there are no Christians in the courts because Christianity is brand new, right? But now we do have Christian attorneys, we have Christian judges, and particularly in the United States. So it's fascinating just just envision that courtroom scenario where you have two people that are seriously devoted to the Lord, but kind of coming down on different sides of this issue. And I think most of us from the outside looking in would say, I mean, at best, she just kind of lacked emotional intelligence. I mean, that just is not the way to be the salt and light. I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind, is to treat people that way. Because like this is not like you're on a short-term mission trip. You're never going to see this person again. Like, this person has to swim in the same pond that you're in every day, right? So, I mean, what was it? Were you at all conflicted having to be in that position?
I mean, I personally was not. And the reason why is the phrase that when I've told that story before, and the very short summary that I will use from it is proselytizing is not evangelizing.
Mm.
And we're called to make disciples. What she was doing was nowhere near driven with a goal toward making disciples. And if that's what her goal was and that's what her motivation was, then I'll chalk it up to the emotional lack of intelligence that you described. I think she was more of a victim of being raised in possibly a church. I
Yeah.
don't know what led to her beliefs or whatever, but I mean, we all know there are many churches out there that on the surface appear to be solid, Bible believing, Jesus following churches that when you really get into it, it's my pastor always says, just like in John, where we talk about how there has to be a healthy balance of grace and truth. I mean, that's the way that we have to reach people. And so many of those churches are just focused on truth, and attacking people and pointing out flaws, rather than acting with any scope of grace, especially to somebody who either doesn't align with your beliefs right now, or at least you're not sure of it. And in either of those scenarios, you're not making any disciples by just calling them out for their sin and attacking them based on that behavior. All you're doing is creating an enhanced stereotype of what the ugly Christian looks like.
Yeah.
And that's not the way we're going to make any progress, especially in today's culture where everybody is so sensitive to being attacked based on what they believe and how they feel and everything else. And so we just need to be mindful of that as we have those interactions. But it's funny that you bring up the whole concept of believers not bringing their disputes with other believers, because I have in some situations been conflicted about that. This wasn't one of them, only because of the scenario, but I've seen cases. I had one not too long ago where two guys who I to this day genuinely believe absolutely devoted to the Lord in the right way and running both of their businesses in a way that reflected that, in the financial advice industry, and they worked together. They got sideways in their personal relationship, and one of them went off on his own and then brought a lawsuit against the guy that he separated from, seeking some unpaid commissions and bonuses and things like that. And it had the chance to be really, really ugly. And what those guys did, which I cannot applaud them enough for, is after we kind of had I'll call it a come to Jesus conversation with both me and then the lawyer on the other side with our respective clients, and said, listen, you guys have had a great relationship for a long time. Is there a path to you getting together and just working this out to the exclusion of the lawyers even? Leave us out of it. And is there a mechanism to accomplish that? And what I proposed and what they ultimately landed on was kind of an informal mediation where they both brought both of their pastors and their wives to a conference room, and they sat down, and sure enough, deal was hammered out and all litigation stopped after that meeting. And it was resolved in a way that I to this day feel like was extremely fair to everybody involved. To the guy who made the initial claims credit, he actually was willing to give on some money that he believed he was entitled to. Our client disagreed with that, but as a compromise, he said, listen, rather than giving it to me, why don't you donate it to a charity that we're both very supportive of, which was a charity that's designed to dig wells in Africa as a mechanism to share the gospel with very unreached communities. And so not only were they able to resolve it, but they were able to take it and then do something great through it.
Yeah. So from more from the employer's standpoint, a lot of the people listening to this episode right now, they're wanting to cultivate a company that is increasingly Christ-centered, which again doesn't mean you create hostile work environments, doesn't mean you put a Christian fish on your logo, all those kinds of things. But what are some of the, like, how can you, is there a way to give, because you want people who share your values, right? You want people, I'm thinking about, for example, if you are selling, let's say you're selling Christian themed products and services. A lot of the books that we publish with our company are Christian books. So if you don't understand Christian doctrine, things like that, you're not going to be able to effectively edit a Christian book. You just don't have the subject matter expertise. Sight and Sound Theater, 600 employees, all Christian, and they're for profit, which I find to be interesting. But I guess they have some sort of, there's some sort of a code that allows them to only hire Christians because they have to have that subject matter expertise. Is that what's going on there and allowing a company like Sight and Sound Theater to be able to just hire Christians? And can we apply that more loosely? Like, for example, In-N-Out Burger has scriptures on all of their paper products. So I didn't realize this. I knew they had like John 3:16 on the soda cups, but Proverbs 3:5 is on the milkshake cups. Proverbs 24:16 is on the fries containers. Luke 6:35 is on the coffee cups. And if somebody comes up to one of the workers and says, like, what is this verse? Like, can you tell me about this verse? Like, would it be legitimate to say, well, we need team members who know how to answer those questions? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it's a tough question. I'll start there. And I'll start with the easier answer because in the In-N-Out situation, Chick-fil-A, same scenario. Not exactly the same, obviously, but obviously a company that is very much publicly a faith-based organization, and that's how they want to be known. And because of that, what you end up with in both scenarios is probably a lot of people, especially in management, who share those values and beliefs. However, ultimately, it can't be an essential function of the job because the job functions are flipping burgers or dropping a fry basket or whatever it may be, working a register. And while we want good customer service and everything else, there's a distinction under the law between a faith-based organization, which is how I will generally describe Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out, similar companies, and religious institutions. So if you're a religious institution where you are ministering, that is, you are in the occupation, in the vocation of ministry. So churches, Christian schools, things that are obviously designed to share a specific religious message. And that is their exclusive purpose, really, or at least primary purpose. In those scenarios, there is the ability to effectively discriminate on the basis of religion. It's through what's called the ministerial exemption to these different discrimination laws. And what it basically says is that if, in order to effectively do that ministerial role, you have to hire somebody who aligns with those beliefs, because we're not going to make you hire somebody who either overtly or because of their lifestyle or whatever else does not align with those beliefs. There's more flexibility there. In the faith-based organization, it's different because that may be our preference. But if we make decisions based exclusively on beliefs, then we do run the risk of violating what would likely be Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is the big federal anti-discrimination law that prohibits discrimination based on religion, among other issues. But then also state laws. There's state laws that are effectively mini versions of Title VII. in most, if not all, states at this point. And so, in those scenarios, we just have to be, again, more intentional, more mindful about it. Now, you said something about interview questions, and that is a great way to maybe accomplish the purpose without overtly discriminating. If we ask people, like one tip I always give folks, don't just ask people what they believe or what their faith-based values are, where they go to church, if they go to church, because any of those types of questions, while it may ferret out the type of information you're interested in, even in a faith-based organization, if we ask that question and we ultimately choose not to hire that candidate, then that candidate is left wondering potentially, because remember, with a failure to hire type allegation, there's not a personnel file. We're not looking at a history of performance as far as why we made the decision that we did. And more importantly, the candidate often doesn't have any details about why they weren't selected if unsuccessful. And so they're left to their own devices to figure out, why wasn't I selected? If the topic of religion, especially if the company initiated that conversation during the interview comes up, and you, the candidate, know that you are working or applying to work for a faith-based organization, and you answered that question in a way that didn't necessarily align, your assumption may automatically be, well, they just didn't hire me because I'm not aligning with their faith. And it may have been based on education, qualifications, completely legitimate, objective points that absolutely gave the business a right to make the decision that it did. But we've unfortunately planted a seed of potential discrimination in that candidate's mind if we ultimately don't hire them.
Yeah. I guess, it's kind of concerning to hear that, because I'm thinking about the cake baker, where he wouldn't he wouldn't decorate the cake to honor this same-sex marriage. And then years in court, they come back around, we want you to make a cake to celebrate Satan's birthday. They obviously know what he believes. So somebody could just come in there and they could say, I'm a Satanist. And now that's on the record. And if you don't hire them, don't they have a case?
Yeah, I mean, it's that is a risk. I mean, when you hold yourself out as a faith-based organization to the public, that you just have to be prepared that your actions will be scrutinized, and there's a chance you will be tested, both from the human realm and the spiritual realm. That's the reality of it, right? We know that as believers, it's pretty clear when you read the gospel that we will experience challenges, trials, tribulations. And if we're not, you need to really be examining yourself as to whether you are genuinely pursuing and surrendering in the way that you should be.
So if I'm a Satanist, and I know that Darren's company publishes primarily books for a Christian audience, and I just want to stick it to them, and I get on a job interview because I saw the posting on Indeed, and I just come right out and say I'm a Satanist, and then let's continue with the interview. Like, what is my legal defense when that person decides that they want to sue me for failure to hire?
So one interesting question will be, how did the topic of their identity as a Satanist come up in the conversation? I mean, so getting back to my point a minute ago, if we asked, hey, tell us about what you believe, and then that led to them saying, well, it's funny you ask. I am a very actively practicing Satanist, and so I'd like to have off Halloween for my satanic Wiccan rituals, whatever it is. We opened that door. And so in that scenario, I think the chances of them attributing the decision to us goes up, because we are the ones that initiated it. The chances of it influencing us, at least on the surface, have likely gone up. If, however, we're having a good interview and we're focused on just getting to know the person, objective qualifications, all of those things, and then they randomly mention religious beliefs. It's no different than if they randomly mention female candidate. Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant. And then if we don't hire that person, yes, they can make a claim. We just need to be able to objectively stand behind the decision that we made based on a reason other than whatever that is. And again, it's going to be case by case. Every situation is unique and needs to be looked at on an individualized basis. But in general, I would say we just need to make sure we focus on as objective data points as possible. They had the candidate we selected had more relevant experience in this field. And relevant experience could be having worked as an editor for a similar organization to yours. And so that gives them a heightened level of qualification, not because they may be a believer, but because they've got better qualifications and they've demonstrated the ability to do exactly what the job duties will entail. And that's something objective we can then focus on. When it gets tough to defend is when our answer is it just wasn't the right fit. Mm-hmm. Because how in the world do we objectively convince somebody else of how we landed on that conclusion without describing things that are really hard to describe unless you're sitting in the room and see all of the context?
Yeah. Well, it's a challenging, for example, as a small, very, very small employer like me, to put out a job posting on Indeed, you're going to pay a lot of money and you can spend a lot of time interviewing just all the wrong candidates when we publish books that are for a Christian audience where whoever's working on those needs to have a very sound understanding of Christianity and Christian concepts, Christian lingo, all of those kinds of things. So how could we put out a job posting that does it, that still is, it kind of filters and kind of communicates that we are a very values driven, organization without getting into trouble?
So maybe a couple of thoughts here. First of all, I think what you just described is okay. Saying that having knowledge of Christian theology and lingo, verbiage, all of that can be essential functions of that job. Now, with that said, there's probably a lot of people who have very different beliefs than your beliefs or my beliefs that would be able to check all those boxes. Academic or intellectual knowledge of the Bible does not in any way mean that you share the same beliefs, values, etc. Obviously, there's a lot of atheists out there who know more about Scripture than a lot of Christians out there. And so from a pure job qualification perspective, that atheist may be more objectively qualified, assuming they have that knowledge. They've done the historical research on Scripture. You see that from a lot of people who, frankly, are antagonistic to the gospel. And so that's going to be one of those. But here's where I will take a step back. When you put things like that in your job posting and you say knowledge of these issues is important, here's who we are, here's what we do, you're going to naturally attract a pool of candidates who likely, not definitively, but who likely share the same beliefs because of a desire to work in what is a missional organization. And so I think that just through that type of identity, getting back to, it's not putting a Christian fish on your logo, it's not just saying that you are a Christian organization, but demonstrating it. That's going to make good, well-qualified candidates for what you need find their way to you because they're going to want to join in that mission. And then we'll be able to, with a completely straight face, explain why we picked that candidate over the person who came in just to test us potentially, because objectively this person's it. This is clearly the better qualified candidate. So that's answer number one. Now you mentioned something that I would be remiss not to touch on, small business. And so these federal laws, and this is important, they only apply if you have 15 or more employees. And so, really small faith based organizations are not going to be covered by Title VII. And so, those federal anti discrimination requirements are not triggered in those organizations. Now, state by state, the threshold may be lower. And so, make sure that you're aware of the state laws that could apply to you. But that is one way that I've seen a lot of smaller faith-based organizations get around this, is just to say, listen, if we were bigger, this might be unlawful, but we're not. And so we're willing to take that chance.
Okay. So you can ask those questions about faith if you're under 15 employees, like in a
Under the
interview?
federal law, yes.
Okay. But
15
maybe
or
not.
more
How about
employees
in
for
South Carolina?
yeah, it's fine in South Carolina. So the South Carolina Human Affairs Law, which is our mini version of Title VII, has a similar 15 employee threshold requirement.
Okay. Well, that's certainly encouraging. What do you think about, like, there's a new organization called Red Balloon, where you're going to go put your job posting on there because you're pretty sure you're at least going to get somebody that's right wing, right? I think that's kind of the idea behind it. I'm just, really just oversimplifying it, but somebody that shares conservative values, which I think is great. Like, are employers with 15 or more, are they going to get in trouble by relying on a platform like that as kind of their go-to source for hiring?
So facially, the answer would be likely no. The challenge would be if that then leads to, I think the only way it really becomes an issue is if a candidate who doesn't align with those values necessarily tries to come and get a job from you, and you say, oh, well, Red Balloon is our exclusive recruiting source. We only accept resumes through Red Balloon. And then because of their beliefs or whatever, they were excluded from Red Balloon from participating. I don't know enough about Red Balloon to know if they, like, how they screen people to make those recommendations on candidates to businesses. But to the extent there is a screening or exclusionary element to it, then I think that's the risk, is if we are exclusively using a service that precludes certain categories of individuals from having an opportunity, that could be problematic.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's all about exclusive use. I mean, if that's just one that we use regularly and it happens to be the one we use most heavily, I don't think that by itself is problematic. It's just if we turn somebody away because they didn't go through that process, and we indicate to them that that is our exclusive means of locating
Yeah.
and making hiring decisions, because then we're effectively using that as a beard to accomplish what we couldn't accomplish on our own.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting to see more companies like Red Balloon and Patriot Mobile and others that are sort of the answer to the shall we say, woke companies in these different industries, providing a conservative, values driven alternative to some of those companies. So I think Red Balloon's a great company. I haven't actually hired on there, but I know they're present at a lot of the faith and work type events and so forth. So as we wrap it up here, Luke, is there something urgent that you feel our listeners need to hear, who are Christians in the marketplace seeking to be more winsome and wise and shrewd about how we do business, how we do hiring, any kind of religious freedom, how we approach these issues, what would you like to leave us with today?
I'll mention something that I've mentioned to a lot of folks recently. Too often, we as believers, and I'm speaking broad scale right now, the American Christian church, there's too tight of a connection between what your faith is and what your political beliefs are. And so, what I would just encourage everybody is as you interact with coworkers, employees, whoever it is, if what they are seeing is a faith that is driven by your political beliefs, that's not going to win anybody for the gospel. And what you want to do is, if there are political conversations, which can be contentious and can be ugly, making sure it's clear that your faith drives your politics and not your politics driving your faith. And frankly, I always encourage folks to try to leave politics out of it as much as possible, with the main reason being, look, I don't care who gets elected in November. They're not the source of my hope. That's the reality of it. And it doesn't matter how frustrated I am because of the results of that election. If the message we're sending to the people around us is that the world is ending because the election doesn't go the way that we want it to, or the world is destined to end if a certain candidate is elected, then you are missing the boat in conveying to those folks where the real source of hope is. I mean, this is not a legal issue. I mean, I see it come up in the bleed over to political discrimination, religious discrimination. So it has implications, but by and large, this is about what's your purpose? What are you trying to accomplish? And if you are genuinely trying to go out and do life on mission and make disciples in your workplace, in your home place, everywhere you are, which is what we're called to do, then you're not going to accomplish it if that's the way you're approaching it.
Yeah. And the culture of our companies will have, and we have a direct impact on that, will have a much greater impact on us and our families, our loved ones, the people we care about, than who gets elected. There's no doubt. There's certainly an impact on the broader culture, but as we always say on this podcast, there is no greater force for kingdom culture making than a company, a Christ-centered company, and that doesn't look like just beating people over the head with a Bible. And you better come to this Bible study or you're getting fired, or even subtly implying that's the only way we're going to operate here. But being winsome and sharing the kingdom. And as we share the kingdom, people get more interested in what the gospel message is all about. So Luke, thank you for helping us be more wise and shrewd and winsome in the marketplace. And it's so good to be able to have this conversation with you today. It's been so good.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure, that's for sure, both to reconnect and to partner with you however I can as I continue watching all the amazing things you're doing, Darren.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Theology of Business podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tune in for the next episode as we continue exploring God's will and ways for business.